You were taught that speaking is a sign of strength. Strong people are those who dare to speak up, who dare to argue, who dare to assert themselves with words. But that is the lesson of the crowd. The lesson of those who truly hold power is the exact opposite. The strong are not those who speak well, but those who know when to remain silent. Silence is not weakness. It is the ability to observe without being drawn in, to listen without needing to prove, to stay in control without being present. Think about it. How many times have you spoken too quickly and regretted it? How many times have you lost control just because of an impulsive reaction? How many times have you been manipulated simply because you feared the silence? The truth is, the more you feel the need to speak, the more you are being controlled. Those who understand the game do not argue to win. They control the atmosphere with their very absence. They do not need to shout to be noticed, because their silence already creates gravity. In this world, the truly dangerous person is the one no one sees. The one truly respected is the one who does not need applause. And if you want to go beyond battles of words, if you want to reach a higher level of influence, then you must learn this art, the art of saying nothing and still making the world fall silent. 1. Silence is not surrender, it is observation and control. In a world where everyone rushes to be heard, to be seen, to be acknowledged, silence is often misunderstood. People assign it shallow labels: weakness, submission, defeat. But the truth is the opposite. Silence is not surrender. Silence is the strategy of those who have moved beyond the need for validation. It is the act of someone who knows how to control themselves before thinking about controlling others. Silence is the space between instinctive reaction and conscious action. It is a place where most people cannot stay, because it exposes the truth that we have never learned how to face ourselves. Without the noise around us, people argue, explain, and react not to understand, but to soothe a wounded ego. And in doing so, they lose the one thing that could grant them power: control. Think back to the times you engaged in arguments. You felt compelled to speak, to prove your point, to teach the other person a lesson. But in the end, did you really win? Or were you simply draining yourself to protect a belief you were not even sure of? That is the trap of the ego. The more you speak, the more you reveal your weakness. The more you try to prove, the more you expose the insecurity within. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." And silence, in this case, is a tool for healing. It forces you to stop, to observe, to ask yourself, why do I want to react? What am I protecting? Is it the truth, or just the image of myself that I am afraid to lose? The person who knows how to remain silent is the one who understands that not everything deserves a response. Not every word is worth your energy. A response may not create change. It may only prolong the battle. But a subtle nod, a purposeful silence, can prompt the other person to self-reflect and realign. In Greek philosophy, Socrates was known not for lecturing, but for questioning. He did not shout to assert logic. He remained silent, listened, and asked questions, allowing others to contradict themselves. His power lay in his ability to restrain reaction and use silence as a means to guide thought. Today, we call it influencing the game, without ever stepping into the arena. Silence is also a kind of refusal, not a refusal of truth, but a refusal to be dragged into a fight. You do not need to win. When someone provokes, offends, or corners you into explaining yourself, they hold the advantage. But if you remain silent and do not respond as expected, you remove the ground beneath them. They have nothing to cling to, and in that emptiness, they begin to waver. True silence does not stem from fear or helplessness. It comes from deep inner strength, from someone who knows there is nothing to prove, because truth does not need to be shouted to exist. And personal value is not measured by how many debates you win, but by how much of your inner world you can control. Those who cannot bear silence have not yet learned the most important lesson of self-mastery. They react because they cannot handle the emptiness between two lines of dialogue. But those who use silence listen more deeply than anyone, not just to words, but to the intentions behind them, to the tremble in the voice, the mismatched gestures, the eyes that avoid. All of it reveals more than any defense ever could. Silence is not absence. It is present at a deeper level. It is not passivity. It is the conscious decision not to respond. It is not weakness. It is the refusal to play a game that holds no value. When you master the ability to stay silent at the right time, you develop one of the rarest qualities in modern life: inner steadiness. It is the kind of presence that makes others cautious, without knowing why. A quiet force that draws attention not with noise, but with the intensity of your non-reaction. When noise becomes the standard, those who can hold their silence become the ones who control the game. And when you can control yourself, nothing outside can control you. 2. Every word you speak is a clue others can use to manipulate you. Language is a gift of humanity, but at the same time, it is a wide open door into the inner world that most of us do not know how to manage. Every word you speak, whether unconsciously or intentionally, is a valuable clue for others to see through you. And if you are not careful, words, instead of being a tool of power, may become the very key others use to manipulate your emotions, will, and behavior. Remember, you are not hurt by what others say. You are hurt by your own reaction to what they say. And that reaction is almost always triggered by what you have previously revealed. When you expose fear, others learn how to threaten you. When you reveal wounds, others, whether intentionally or not, will touch those wounds. When you go on about ideals, opinions, and expectations, you are not just expressing intelligence. You are also accidentally providing a map for others to control you through the very things you value. This is not a call for absolute silence. This is a reminder that every word leaves a trace, and if that trace is not wisely guarded, it can become a blade turned back against its owner. Have you noticed that in arguments, the angry one often loses, not because they are wrong, but because they talk too much? They let emotions override reason. They blurt out facts, justifications, even things that should be kept private. Meanwhile, the one who controls their words, though they speak less but with sharpness and selectivity, always dominates, because they do not give away too much information, and thus retain control. Words are a double-edged sword. They can protect you, but can also betray you. The wise do not speak everything they think. They choose not to deceive, but to preserve their control. Recall a time when you shared too much with someone too soon. What happened? Most likely, the things you thought were signs of intimacy later became weapons for judgment or used against you. That does not mean you should never open up, but you must know when to do it, with whom, and to what extent. Carl Jung once said, "What you show the world is your persona, but what you keep hidden is where true power lies." Those who cannot keep their thoughts to themselves are easily led. Those who feel they must explain, prove, or justify, or living from a place of weakness. Modern life teaches us that speaking more is a sign of confidence, of value. That might be true in a safe environment, but in real life, where every conversation is a subtle power negotiation, the one who speaks less but with precision is the most formidable. There is a rule in psychological strategy: if you want to control someone, let them speak as much as possible, because as they speak, they reveal what they care about, believe in, and fear. And once you know these things, you can guide them wherever you wish, without them realizing it. In high-level negotiations, you will see that true masters are not the ones who talk constantly. They ask questions, create space, and keep silent at the right time, to let the other party speak more than they should. It is the inability to tolerate silence that leads many into fatal mistakes. By oversharing, they think they are convincing, but in fact, they are unknowingly exposing their internal structure. The most powerful person in the room is not the one who is most heard, but the one who makes others feel the need to speak more. In order to be accepted, subtle manipulation always starts with listening, and the person who can manipulate you most deeply is not the one who forces you, but the one who makes you want to speak more. So do not be too quick to consider words the ultimate form of power. True power is the ability to hold back what needs to be held, and only speak what you have fully mastered. Do not give away your blueprint too early. Do not hand over your power just because you cannot stand silence. Learn to observe how you speak. Listen to yourself as if you were an outsider. Every time you feel the urge to respond, stop and ask, why am I speaking? To convince, to win, or just to soothe the insecurity inside? Only when you understand the motive behind your own words can you stop others from using those words to turn against you. 3. Intentional disappearance, to make your presence valuable. There is a paradox that most people overlook. The more frequently you appear, the more ordinary you become in the eyes of others. Constant presence does not reinforce value, it erodes it. Because in human psychology, what is too easy to access is seen as less valuable. On the contrary, what is rare and hard to reach becomes a desired object. Therefore, if you want to elevate your value in the eyes of others, you must learn how to disappear intentionally. Disappearance is not running away. It is not cutting off. It is not passive silence. It is a strategy for managing presence. You withdraw to prepare for a stronger return. You create a void so that others can feel your influence for your absence, not just through noise. Think of the most magnetic people in your life. They are not the ones who show up every day, talk to everyone, always ready for every situation. They are the ones who are selective with their presence. They know when to show up and when to vanish. Why is this effective? Because humans, subconsciously, always desire what is rare. The rarer something is, the harder it is to predict. The more its absence creates longing, the more people think about it. That is why purposeful absence does not diminish your value, it multiplies it. Steve Jobs did not speak to the public every day, but when he stepped on stage, the whole world went silent to listen. Leonardo da Vinci disappeared for years, but every time he unveiled a work, it became immortal. Miyamoto Musashi, the Japanese swordmaster, was not someone who fought all the time. But when he did, he never needed a second strike. What do they have in common? They managed their presence like a weapon. In today's chaotic world, people mistakenly believe that to be noticed, you must always be present. You must post every day, talk constantly, respond instantly, and appear everywhere. But in truth, that only dissolves you into the crowd. The person who is always available is the easiest to overlook. You do not need to disappear entirely. You just need to learn how to control your frequency. Give others the sense that you are not always there, but when you are, you create gravity. This creates a strong psychological effect. People will appreciate more, listen more, desire more, simply because you appear less. Imagine you are a piece of music. If sound goes on non-stop, it becomes noise. But if you know when to create silence, that silence will highlight the melody. Rhythmic absence is how you add depth to your presence. However, intentional disappearance is not for the faint-hearted. It requires one essential condition. You must break free from the need to be constantly noticed. Most people cannot stop showing up because they are afraid of being forgotten. They do not dare to be silent because they fear losing their place. But that very fear makes them repetitive, dull, and predictable. Those who dare to disappear are the ones who do not need constant recognition to feel worthy. They know their value comes from inner depth, not the number of times they show up. And that is why every time they return, others had to stop and pay attention. Disappearance is also a way to preserve energy. When you are present too often, you not only saturate others but also deplete yourself. You lose the time to rebuild your strength and the space to observe, analyze, and strategize. In the art of leadership, those with true power do not need to be in every meeting. They just need to appear at the critical moment, and their words carry more weight than 100 hours of debate from others. Because they know their previous silence was the foundation for their current presence. So if you want others to value you, do not try to be seen all the time. Let them feel your absence. Let them be surprised when you show up. And let every appearance you make carry a message, a gravity, a strategic intent. Intentional disappearance is the art of making people remember you, even when you are not there. 4. Patience is the ultimate form of power. In a fast-paced world, where everyone seeks instant results, immediate responses, and immediate victories, patience is no longer seen as a noble virtue. On the contrary, it is often misunderstood as slowness, weakness, or indecisiveness. But that is a dangerous misconception. Because if there is any form of power that truly makes you invincible in the psychological game, it is the power of patience. You do not need to shout to gain power. You do not need to act first to prove your strength. In reality, the winner is not the one who arrives first, but the one who knows how to wait for the perfect moment to act. And that is what most people cannot do, because they cannot endure delay. Observe around you. You will see many people lose control simply because they cannot stand the moment without an answer. They rush to reply when ignored, react impulsively when criticized, or feel the urge to prove themselves when underestimated. But that very rush makes them reveal their hand too early, lose psychological advantage, and fall into a position of being manipulated. Meanwhile, those who are patient not only control the situation, but they also control both their emotions and the reactions of others. They do not need to enter a battle to win. They just need to remain still, observe, and let the opponent burn themselves out in their own impatience. Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary Japanese swordsman, used patience as a strategy for psychological warfare. He would deliberately arrive hours late to duels, making his opponents wait in the sun, growing tense and agitated. The result, when the duel actually began, the opponent had already lost, mentally defeated, overwhelmed by their own lack of self-control. Patience, by nature, is an invisible power. It makes no noise, it draws no attention, but precisely because of that, it becomes the most fearsome weapon. It does not need to attack. It causes others to collapse from within. You may react quickly and win a short-term fight, but you cannot win the long game without patience. Because most of life's important battles are not immediate showdowns, but prolonged standoffs that stretch across days, months, or even years. Whoever endures longer wins. And here is the paradox. To control others, you must first control yourself. And that cannot happen without practicing patience in thought, in reaction, and in strategy. In negotiations, the one who speaks first is often at a disadvantage, because they have revealed their desired outcome. In relationships, the person who texts first after an argument is often the one seeking approval. In debates, the one who loses patience exposes what the other side is trying to draw out. Patience is not passive waiting. It is a sophisticated action, where you manipulate space and time to force others to move to your rhythm. It is like a puppeteer pulling strings, letting the horse believe it is running free, while every move has been pre-scripted. The strength of patience does not lie in how well you suppress. It lies in how precisely you strike at the optimal moment. The impatient act to vent emotion. The patient acts to win. And for that reason, patience goes hand in hand with a higher ability, the capacity to withstand uncertainty. How long can you remain patient when you do not know how it will turn out? How long can you stay grounded when the other side continuously attacks, insults, ignores, or makes you doubt yourself? This is where the psychological game becomes truly deep, because the winner is not the one who knows more, but the one who can endure more. Patience is also a powerful filter in relationships. It helps you recognize who is only there when you are always available, and who truly values your presence. When you know how to withdraw at the right time, when you no longer respond immediately, when you do not react out of habit, you force others to reveal their true selves. And that shows you which connections are real, and which are invisible exploitation. In a world of instant likes, immediate replies, and seen but not responded, those who can wait, observe, and let silence speak are the ones holding the most dangerous kind of power. Because true power does not come from being heard right away. It comes from choosing the moment to speak, and making the entire room fall silent. 5. The psychology of rarity. The less, the more valuable. Humans do not always assess value based on actual quality. In most cases, we evaluate things based on a deeper psychological factor, scarcity. What is rare becomes precious. What is easily available is easily overlooked. And the irony is this principle does not only apply to material things but also to people, to emotions, to presence, and even to silence. You may be deep, intelligent, thoughtful, but if you are always available, always responsive, always present, then over time, your value in the eyes of others will unconsciously diminish. Not because you are any less, but because you become too predictable. The human brain is wired to prioritize what is scarce. It is a primal survival mechanism. What is uncommon might be important. What is rarely encountered might be worth preserving. And what is hard to grasp will always make us think more about it. That is why if you want to increase your magnetism, emotional power, and presence, you must learn one thing. Do not give yourself away too easily. Not because you are selfish, but because you understand your energy, time, and emotions are not meant for everyone. Over-availability is a double-edged sword. When you always reply to messages immediately, when you are always ready to listen to someone vent, When you are always the one initiating a conversation, a meetup, an apology, you think you are maintaining a connection, but in reality, you are creating invisible boredom. From a psychological perspective, what is repeated too often is classified by the brain as normal. And normal is not something we long for. This is why people who speak less but with depth, who appear rarely but with presence, who express sparingly but with consistency, are always more captivating. The empty frame effect when absence creates depth. Imagine looking at a painting. What holds your gaze is not always the image at the center, but the white space around it. It is the not there that highlights the there. Your presence works the same way. If you always show up, always speak, always explain, others will have no room to imagine, to yearn, or to discover you on their own. You unintentionally strip away the mystery, which is an essential ingredient of psychological attraction. When you withdraw at the right time, when you disappear from a group chat, when you remain silent amidst a heated argument, you create a psychological gap. And within that gap, people begin to fill it with speculation, longing, and even desire. Rarity sparks desire, not because of logic, but instinct. You can explain as much as you want, but people will never truly value something if they have never felt its absence. That is why when you remain silent, it is not that you miss an opportunity. You are actually planting the seed of your value in the minds of others. When you show up less, they will notice every time you appear. When you speak less, every word you say will be heard more attentively. When you share less, every line you write will be read more carefully than usual. Scarcity automatically triggers attention, and attention is the most valuable currency in any relationship. Controlling your presence means controlling demand. There is a harsh truth. People do not appreciate what they have too much of, from material things, to affection, to kindness. But if you know how to make your presence limited, you will start controlling something even more powerful: desire. Desire does not arise because you have value, but because others do not have access to you whenever they want. Desire does not surface when you always say yes, but when you begin to choose who is worthy of that yes. So if you are always available, you easily become an infinite resource. And when others think you are always available, they will begin to treat your presence as a given. That is when you lose your power. Even if you are still just as good, let your presence be a privilege, not a habit. Here is the golden rule. Do not let others treat your kindness, your listening, your intelligence, or your presence as an obligation. Turn it into a privilege, something they must cherish when they have it, and miss when it is gone. How? Show up selectively. Share only what truly matters. Instead of repeating the predictable, withdraw before others begin to feel bored. Create space for others to miss you, instead of cramming in more of yourself. Remember, true value does not come from how much you give, but from knowing when to give and when to hold back. 6. Psychological warfare through silence. People often think war only happens through gunfire, heated debates, or intense arguments. But there is a deeper and more brutal kind of war, psychological warfare, where the weapon is silence. You do not need to shout in someone's face to hurt them. You do not need to retaliate with words to win. In truth, the most effective way to attack is not to make others suffer, but to make them ask themselves, why does this hurt? And nothing triggers confusion, insecurity, and psychological breakdown as quickly as prolonged silence at the right moment. Silence is not a void, it is a mirror. When you choose not to react, not to respond, not to say a word, you may think you are withdrawing, but in reality, you are putting up a psychological mirror, reflecting back the fears, wounds, and instability within the other person. An angry person always wants you to react, because if you respond, they have a reason to escalate. If you justify, they have something to hold on to. If you argue back, they will think, I've struck a nerve. But when you stay silent, they fall into an internal crisis, because in the absence of a response, the human mind automatically fills in the blanks with the worst assumptions. They start to wonder, what is he thinking? Was I wrong? Why isn't she reacting? Am I being disrespected? Do they not need me anymore? And that chain of thoughts is the dagger that pierces right into the ego. Not reacting does not mean you have no impact. You do not need to say a single word to influence someone. In fact, silence can exert 10 times more pressure than speech, because it not only unsettles the other person, it also causes them to expose themselves. Notice how in an argument, the person who stays silent longer, who controls their emotions better, is often the one holding the upper hand. Because when one side keeps talking, the more they speak, the more they unknowingly reveal their weaknesses, motives, wounds, and lack of control. Meanwhile, the silent side, just by listening and observing, causes the other to collapse their own defense. That is why in the art of negotiation, interrogation, and power dynamics, silence is not a defense, it is a strategy. Silence destroys the sense of certainty. Humans need feedback to know where they stand in a relationship. An answer, even if it is no, is still more comforting than total silence. Because at the very least, they know their position, but when you say nothing, offer no confirmation, no rejection, no display of emotion, you unintentionally strip away the other person's internal compass. They begin to spiral into assumptions, and you do not need to do a thing, because they will convince themselves through fear. This is something that great strategists like Musashi, Talleyrand, and Steve Jobs all understood well. Ambiguity is a weapon, and silence is the simplest way to plant ambiguity into someone's mind. To wield psychological silence effectively, you must first master yourself. It is easy to explode, to react when attacked, to defend yourself with arguments. But those who use silence as a strategy are not cold-hearted. They are masters of impulse control. When you are insulted, and you simply smile, stay silent, and look them in the eye without saying a word, you have already won. When someone relentlessly demands a response, and you remain silent with calm, you are controlling the rhythm of the entire interaction. When you can stay silent in the midst of chaos, you become the center, not because you are loud, but because you are the stillness that draws all attention. Caution: do not use silence as a weapon unless you have tamed your pride. Silence can be a sharp strategy, but if you use it just to retaliate, to prove you are superior, then you are still playing a game of ego, nothing more. Silence becomes truly powerful when it comes from clarity, not from hurt. When you are silent because you see no need to prove anything. When you choose not to react because you know, the more some things are spoken, the weaker they become. Conclusion: silence is the invisible presence of strength. When you do not react, yet still cause others to react, you are in control. When you do not need words, yet still leave a deep impact, you are operating at a higher level of communication. Verbal warfare is for the impulsive. Silent warfare is the game of the elite. And if you master this art, you enter a different world, the world of those who do not need to shout to be heard. After all, you have seen clearly, words may get you heard for a moment, but silence at the right time makes you heard forever. Those who speak too much easily reveal their weaknesses. Those who react too often fall into emotional traps. But those who know how to restrain themselves are the ones who hold the center, without needing to stand in the middle. You do not need to speak to be understood. You do not need to be present to be noticed. And you do not need to win an argument to take control. When you learn how to stay silent, how to disappear, how to show up only when necessary, you step out of the game of the ego. You no longer need to convince anyone. You do not need to defeat anyone, because the very act of no longer needing is a victory. Silence is art, patience is a weapon, rarity is power, and when you possess all three, the world no longer shakes you. You are the one who bends the world in your direction. So if you have ever felt the urge to speak just to be acknowledged, pause. If you have ever feared that silence would make you disappear, remember, the rarer something is, the harder it is to forget. In a world where everyone is trying to say something, the one who stays silent is the one who makes everything worth hearing.